everyone. Today's session will cover literature review, and an overview of the session basically entails two things: how to get started with a literature review, and some effective strategies for synthesizing your literature review. Now, what is a literature review? So, I'll offer two definitions for what is a literature review, and I think the first one is more abstract in terms of it tells you what a literature review basically is, but the second definition is more concrete in that it will tell you what you should include in that. So, with this, I'll introduce the first definition. So, literature review will be defined in terms of process and product. The process involves the researcher in exploring the literature to establish the status quo, formulate a problem or research inquiry, to defend the value of pursuing the line of inquiry established, and to compare the findings and ideas of others with his or her own. The product involves a synthesis of the work of others in a form which demonstrates the accomplishments of the exploratory process. Now, I think you need to pay attention to certain words here. Of course, process and product are important as terms, but do understand that whatever writing you do actually entails and can be discussed in terms of process and product. So, what is important in understanding what a literature review is? First, you have to explore the literature, or basically, it involves the literature which establishes or has established the status quo, which is basically the point of inquiry that you are researching, what has already been researched, what is canonical as well. Then you have to formulate a problem or research inquiry, and then you have to defend the value of pursuing the line of inquiry established, meaning what it is that you're going to do and why it is that you're going to do. And then compare the findings and ideas of others with your own addition or your own uh, inquiry, right? So the product then involves a synthesis of the work of others in a form which demonstrates the accomplishment of the exploratory process. So basically, you have to then synthesize your own work with the established work of the others. So this is one definition of writing of a literature review, and this is taken from Rowena Murray. The other one, which is slightly more concrete, is this: a literature review is a critical synthesis of existing research theories and findings related to a particular topic or question, right? It involves summarizing, analyzing, and interpreting the current body of knowledge to highlight key trends, debates, and gaps in the literature. Again, please pay attention to the particulars here. Interpreting the current body of knowledge to highlight key trends, key debates, and gaps in literature. And what is the purpose of a literature review? The purpose it is to contextualize the current research within the broader academic field and often lays the foundation for further study or new research questions. So, this is one definition of literature review that I believe actually tells you about the process itself. Okay, because it begins with what is most crucial: a critical synthesis. And what is it that you are going to critically synthesize? Existing research theories and findings related to your particular topic or question. And this entails summarizing, analyzing, as well as interpreting the current body of knowledge to highlight key trends, debates, and gaps in the literature, right? So, this is one very important definition of how to write a literature review, or what is also a literature review. So, this basically sums up the process and the product both. Now, if you can just pay attention here, what is a literature review? The key takeaways from both the definitions would be: it establishes the current status quo, It formulates a problem. It defends the line of pursuing the inquiry. It compares the findings and ideas of others with your own. It is a synthesis of the work of others. It demonstrates the accomplishment of the exploratory process. Basically, where do my ideas come from? Who has worked on my topic before? Which areas are ripe for further development? Why is this problem important to pursue? How are your findings, methods, and questions different from others in your field? What did I learn from previous researchers on my topic? What hasn't been explored yet? Which is basically identifying the gap in your field. Okay. So you can actually take down these questions, and the answer to these questions would help you formulate your literature review concretely. Okay. Now, what is a good literature review, or what does it contain? A good literature review demonstrates that the researcher is aware about the prior work and debates on the research topic, which is basically all kinds of knowledge, your facts, concepts, procedures, whatever it is. A good literature review identifies relevance as well as potential gaps on which researcher can base or build their study. Basically, it is comprehension. How good of a comprehender are you? That is what this statement contains. It sharpens the research questions of the study and identify a suitable method of analysis, and then it positions a thesis statement with respect to prior literature. Okay. Now, what should a good literature review do? A good literature review should challenge neutral scholarship. As we all know, no scholarship is actually neutral. All of it contains some power, right? So if you think that someone has positioned their scholarship as neutral, that is what you have to challenge. Interrogate the ways in which knowledge is produced, disseminated, and used. Basically, building up on the previous line, which is challenge neutral scholarship. Recognize how paradigms have historically privileged male, Eurocentric, Anglophone, and heteronormative perspectives. Okay, again, very important to pay attention to. And this is a tool to decolonize and diversify the sources, perspectives, and methodologies that contribute to the academic field. So this is what a good literature review should be doing. So you can have these as your markers, and as you write your literature review, you can tick mark what you have achieved in your literature review. So now 7 steps to producing a literature review. This is more of just like a process, flowchart kind of a thing, which I found to be very useful. You identify your question, you review discipline styles, then you search the literature, then you manage your references, then you critically analyze and evaluate, then you synthesize, and then you write the review. So basically, writing a literature review is a 7 steps process, and this is what this entails. And your synthesis doesn't just come from reading, right, or collecting sources. Before synthesis, you have to critically analyze and evaluate. This is very important, right? So, your 7 steps basically are all of these, which would result in the production of a good literature review. Now, as is always with any piece of writing, a literature review must contain at least an introduction or background section, a body that selectively or strategically discusses sources, and a conclusion that generally contains a gap statement. Okay? Now, this is the part where I want you to pay slight attention to, uh, because this is basically a conversation on how to organize the main body. So now there are many ways of organizing the main body, and this is something that you can choose after your interaction with your supervisor, because these could also be discipline specific, right? So you could either go the thematic way, which is basically key ideas, theory, or concepts, and how different sources have engaged with it. So, example tracing debates around Malayalam cinema, right? And you could be talking about it through characterization, identity construction, trope of family, etc. The other thing could be chronological, where you track down ideas and theories and arguments and how they have evolved over time in your area of research. Then you could also have something contextual. See if it is relevant, then what is the literature on the topic in different country contexts. Okay? And this could be a comparative framework. Perspective. Stating the perspectives or debates of different authors in your area of research. And then methodological. So, if your research is making a methodological intervention, this could possibly be the way to organize your main body of the literature review. How have the questions been studied so far? What have the methods been? And how you're going to intervene or depart from the methods used. And also critically evaluate the shortcomings of the methods that have been used so that you can position your own method as a necessity, right? Now, how do you decide the scope of your paper or your research? Again, four main parameters. Topicality. Topic of research should be defined and refined for the purpose of review. Again, going back to the statements that I have been making in my previous sessions as well, you move from general to specific. So, something like social justice, okay, but then social justice in what? Social justice in education. Okay, fine, social justice in education, but again, to be more specific, social justice in adult education in India. Okay. Then comprehensiveness. Decide on how comprehensive you want it to be. Example, review the topic in different contexts, disciplines, cross-disciplinarity, or whatever it is that suits your understanding and writing. Relevance. How close or far is particular literature from your research questions or broad area? And then currency. How far you want to go back to or stick to recent publications, say last 20 to 25 years, especially when there is a lot available on your topic. Okay, so these are the ways through which you can streamline the scope of your research. Now again, this is something that I'm just positioning here. I'm just assuming here that you would know what are primary sources and what are secondary sources. Primary sources basically compiles raw information like official records, first-hand evidence, and it makes your work more original and credible. Secondary sources are sources that can be used to evidence your claims, right? And it compiles second-hand information. These could be commentary and evaluation from other researchers. It shows how your work relates to existing research and brings together primary sources which are not easy to find. Okay, so this is just one small slide that I wanted to show to indicate what are primary sources and what are secondary sources. How to engage with a source. Now, this is very important. And again, this is a checklist that you can keep with you whenever you are moving around with, a source or trying to figure out what source to use and whether that source is going to be useful to you or not. So, your checklist would include what were the aims and objectives of this book? What were the findings? Okay, another important thing. This, of course, as you've understood, the source is something which is tangential. I am using book, but this could be a text. Okay. So your checklist would be what were the aims and objectives of this book? What were the findings? Based on the findings, what was its central argument? What method of analysis did the author follow? Why did the author think that such a book needs to be written? What was the book's contribution to the field of education? Now, this is a particular example going back to the social justice in education example, right? Does it have any connection to my topic? If no, why? If yes, how? Okay. So after answering these questions, you would know whether you have to take this source into consideration or not. And another tip that I would like to offer here is that all these questions in this checklist are also the questions that you can use to critically evaluate a source as well, or critically evaluate a text as well. Okay. So if you are able to say yes to these questions, that okay, this has connection to my topic, you have in a way made a small intervention, or you have in a way actually critically evaluated one of the most important source for your writing, your literature review, right? Just before your synthesis. Okay, so these are the questions that you can use and utilize to also critically read a text for your literature review. Okay, and again, these are questions that would stay with you because I think these are questions that you can keep in mind when you start doing your free writing tomorrow, right? So you can actually, like, if you're struggling with a source, perhaps use these questions and see whether that source is now making sense to your research or not. Now, again, to reiterate some of the questions the review of the literature can answer. Now, again, these are some questions and not an entire list. So you can see literature search and review on your topic. What are the key theories, concepts, and ideas? What are the epistemological and ontological grounds for the discipline? What are the main questions and problems that have been addressed to date? How is knowledge on the topic structured and organized? What are the origins and definitions of the topic? What are the political standpoints? What are the major issues and debates about topic? And what are the key sources? Okay. Now again, this is kind of self-explanatory. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time in explaining each and every of these arrows. But just understand that this is a good checklist to keep in mind when you start writing your literature review, or when you are trying to figure out that okay, what are the questions that my review has to answer. Again, not necessary that your review ends up answering all the questions, okay, but these are the most important ones, and try to answer as many of these as possible to make your research as airtight as possible. Okay. Now, this is an example that I have uh, compiled. Do understand that this is not a complete literature review, right? A literature review is longer, but for clarity and considering the time span that we have, I just reduced this to a paragraph to indicate the main pointers that should be integrated when you write a literature review. So, this is just a sample of a literature review which has been condensed to one paragraph to show you how to go about answering questions in the literature review, or how to write a literature review. Okay, do not take of this as a perfect example. Just use this as an illustrative example to understand how to go about positioning the questions that your literature review should be answering. Okay, so we'll take 2 minutes to read this. I'll pause for a while. All of you take a minute. Okay, just take a minute. Then I'll read it out and I'll tell you what is happening. So take a minute to read it on your own, and then I'll read it out loud for everyone. So, in this study of peri-urban Sangarede, most of the observations that are identified as signs of urban transition are solutions that communities have found to face challenges presented by urban growth. Okay, and then you position the so this is the finding. Now, an example, a specific example would be, for example, to combat rising labor prices due to competition with urban industries, some farmers are switching to less labor intensive crops like teak, sugar, and mangoes. So, this is a specific claim or this is a specific example to substantiate the above observation. Other examples of peri-urban creative adaptation will be identified throughout the analysis. This is signposting, right? That this is what will be done. The literature around creative adaptation in cities has been primarily focused on either the struggles of rural communities adapting to natural disasters, and who has done these studies? Allen et al. In 2006, or the social pressures faced by slum dwellers, Kuntia 2012, right? So, what others have said. It is important to distinguish that peri-urban villages are a distinct category of community from slums. Although they frequently are low income, they do not have the complete informality, lack of basic services, and extreme density found in urban slums. And though equally vulnerable to climate change, peri-urban communities are not quite as isolated as rural villages. Now, this is author's point of departure from the existing literature, right? And you can see the wording. It is important to distinguish that. Now, finally, after reviewing what has been done and what new has to be said or whatever, and after identifying the gap, this is what the author, the author now comes to their claim. Despite these differences, the theories of creative adaptation, Bolle 2005, which speak to the ability of individuals to find solutions to their own problems, appear to apply equally well to the peri-urban zone. Okay, so this is how you have to go about, or this is perhaps one of the ways through which you can build your literature review. Okay, and you will see that most of the important questions have been answered in this one paragraph. Again, very important for me to iterate that this is just an illustrative example. I couldn't have shared an entire literature review chapter, but maybe what I can do is share that as a resource for you or to understand how to structure a literature review chapter. Okay, so this is just to show this as an example considering the time span that we are working in. Okay, so I hope this is illustrative enough for you to understand. Now, these are the prompts that could help you also streamline your own literature review. And again, this is something that you might want to look at when you start writing your literature review in the writing session tomorrow. Okay, so you will have the, Sonali will have the slide and you can actually work through these prompts when you start writing tomorrow. Okay. I'll just go through these prompts anyway. I want to explore in 30 to 50 words. Two key scholars who have looked at this issue are they have argued that there is still work to be done. My research is closest to that of or departs from, and my projected findings are. Okay, so these are the prompts that could help you streamline your literature review process as much as possible. And if you feel that you work better in terms of like tables, perhaps this is one table that you can make for your own use, where you have a lot of sources, you're referring to a lot of sources, and when you are streamlining those sources, these are the categories through which you can streamline your sources, right? So for source one, what is the research question or topic or theme? What is the theoretical framework that has been implied? What is the methodology? What are the results and findings? And what is the conclusion? And same for source two. So in this way, you will also have a consolidated in a way, a consolidated data for all the sources that you have referred to, and you would know that, okay, my source one was this, my source two was this is what was being talked about, right? So this is going to be a very easy way for you to access sources to synthesize them into your literature review, right? Now, I would depart, not actually depart per se, but I would actually like to use this framework to move into the next segment of this workshop, which is basically an introduction to synthesis, or how to go about the synthesizing process when you are writing your literature review. And I would again recommend using a table like this. Okay, because if you're taking notes and if you don't have them in a table format, chances are likely that you may end up misplacing the notebook, or you may end up keeping tabs on your sources, right? You may forget where you have mentioned source 3. So you might end up skipping that crucial information. And since most of us are working on screens, in the sense you may have a laptop or you may have a computer, try to create an Excel sheet. That's the surest way of, also streamlining data and storing everything at one place. And if not, you can actually print out a table like this and maybe fill that in if you prefer going the pen and paper method. Okay, so it works both the ways. But I would recommend using this table as a sure short way of streamlining and consolidating your sources. Now, synthesizing. So before we move to synthesizing, there's one important, I mean, and a very crucial pre-synthesis step that all of us have to do. And this is basically summarizing. Okay. So summarizing is basically synthesis pre-writing. And the three most important aspects of a good summary are it has to be accurate, it has to be concise, and it has to be objective. Okay. And how do you write a good summary? You read the source several times, paying special attention to the introduction, topic and transition sentences, and conclusion. In your own words, recount what the key takeaways are from the article, and then organize these key takeaways into logically connected sentences using appropriate cohesive devices. Okay. Now, steps for summarizing. If you're reading longer chapters, like a chapter or a journal article, skim read the information. Note subheadings, the first and last paragraphs and topic sentences. Reread a difficult text several times. Write notes in point form using keywords and ideas. So you make a bullet list of notes using keywords and ideas. Put your text away and write your summary from your notes. Okay. Refer to the original to make sure that your summary truly reflects the writer's ideas and strength of opinion, degree of certainty on this topic. And do not forget to use an in text reference at the start or end of your summary. Most people think that summary doesn't need a citation, or paraphrasing doesn't need a citation. I hate to break it to you, but they do. Okay, so if you have summarized and if you have not given your, or if you have not cited your source, then it would be counted as plagiarism, right? So please pay special attention to ensure that you are citing your reference. I have an example for you to understand that this is what a summarized text looks like. And if I were to go back to this accurate, concise, and objective, you would know what is happening here. So again, we'll just take half a minute for each one of you to like read it, and then I'll read it out loud, and then we can just like quickly see what's happening here. You will see this chunk. The original text is 103 words and a summarized text is just 31 words. And again, pay attention to the citation. It has been cited, right? So just take half a minute to quickly read this and then I'll read it out loud as well. Okay. So the original text reads as: For most people, writing is an extremely difficult task if they're trying to grapple in the language with new ideas and new ways of looking at them. Sitting down to write can be an agonizing experience, which doesn't necessarily get easier with the passage of time and the accumulation of experience. For this reason, you need to reflect upon and analyze your own reactions to the task of writing. That is to say, the task will be more manageable if you learn how to cope with your own particular ways, avoiding putting off the moment when you must put pen to paper. Now, the summarized text would read as: Inexperienced and even skilled writers can feel a great deal of anguish when faced with writing tasks. However, the response can be managed by recognizing and coping with personal avoidance strategies. Right? So, you see, the essence has been retained. There has been no addition to the meaning of the original, it has just been condensed to a shorter and a more comprehensible text, right? So that is what is the summary, or that is how you write a summary. And again, these tips would be available to you. So if by any chance you're also working on summarizing your readings, just follow these and see how you can go about summarizing your text. Now again, since I again would like reiterate, I'm slightly partial towards table format. And this is again a very good way of actually thinking of a structure for summaries in a table format. Okay. So, you should know who the author is. You should know when it was written, which is basically the date. You should know what the topic is. You should know the methods: where, when, who, how, why. Then you should know the findings or the conclusions, basically what was found, what was the significance of the findings, and critique. Okay, strengths, weaknesses, and limitations of the article. Again, these will take you a step closer to synthesizing for your literature review. Okay. Now, what is a synthesis? A reorganization or a reshuffling of information. Give a new interpretation of old material, combine new and old interpretations, trace intellectual progression like major debates. So, again, this is where this table comes in handy. Up until findings, conclusions, you would know that, okay, this is something that already exists. But the critique is something that you offer on your own. And this is basically where you step in, where you combine new and old interpretations you give a new interpretation of old material. Okay. So again, this flow chart is something that you may want to pay special attention to when you're understanding the process that is synthesis. A synthesis is like a research puzzle. Okay. So you have three sources, right? Source one, source two, and source three. Your literature review basically would then mean, when you're synthesizing these three sources, your voice plus source one. Then again your voice, then source two. Then your voice, then source three, and then your voice. Okay. So you can combine source two and source three and then have your own interpretation and intervention. But start with your voice, establish one source. Then elaborate through your voice, then introduce sources two, three. Even if you want to introduce source four and five, do that. Then give a combined interpretation or whatever it is, which basically means you intervene, you introduce your own voice. Okay. Again, not a hard and fast rule, right? This is not arbitrary. You can move source 3 later and have your own voice before source 3 as well. But then do ensure that there is not a lot of break in trying to, like, introducing your voice and keeping your sources apart, right? So it's a good idea to synthesize at least two sources at one place and then continue using your voice. Now, again, another example that you might want to look at. Again, I'll take a minute and give all of you a minute to read this. And please pay special attention to the markers that I have made here. This is for you to understand. I have highlighted this so that you know that, okay, this is what is happening. So I'll just read it out. The literature on the imposter phenomenon is limited regarding graduate students, and no known studies have compared online graduate students to traditional graduate students. Previous studies on graduate students have indicated that online students experience lower levels of anxiety. Divani 2010. Researchers have theorized that the loss of social cues and pressures in electronic communications may reduce anxiety associated with asking for help. Then you have Kit Santis and Chow 2007, and may create a more comfortable, open environment where all members are equal. Sullivan 2002. Many cues about the context of an interaction are not present in electronic communication, such as body language, nonverbal cues, physical appearance, and emotional reactions. Parks and Freud 96. Without this information, communication online should result in less social influence and conformity in comparison to face communications, Parks and Freud 1996. Because face to face communications are absent or limited in online graduate programs, it is theorized that online graduate students will experience less anxiety and less intense IP when compared to their traditional counterparts, right? So you can see that the writer has included multiple sources in that paragraph, which has been highlighted blue. And towards the end, the writer has also included an analysis of the topic and added something new to the scholarly conversation, right? So, this is a very good example of synthesizing for your literature review. Now, again, this is the synthesis matrix, and it is just a sample that can be altered to suit the type of literature review required, and headings are just a guide. And you can, of course, use Excel spreadsheet to accommodate whatever you have to write. Okay, so you have your author source, title, year, purpose, rationale, aims, question posed, your method, analysis, characteristic, study type, results, findings, and conclusions, key ideas and themes, strengths, weaknesses, limitations, gaps, similarities, differences to other studies, notes, conclusions, comments, questions arising. Okay. Now, some do's that you have to keep in mind while you start synthesizing and writing your literature review. Explore how sources can be used to support your own position and develop your scholarly tone. Express a stance towards previous studies, not just I agree or disagree. Okay, that's not a stance, that's just a statement. You have to state that, okay, if I'm agreeing, why is it that I'm agreeing? How is it contributing to my question that I'm posing, okay, or the research that I'm doing. Try to start and end paragraphs with your own ideas and your own words. Again, going back to the table, your voice and your voice, okay, and use quotes sparingly. So if you have to use quotes, go the paraphrasing way. But your literature review should not just be quotes and quotes and quotes. You have to summarize and you have to make a good use of your paraphrasing skills as well. So this is all that I had to offer today, and I'll be ready to take questions. I know this is quite an intense topic, so let it sit with you also for a while because this tends to be really confusing at times, right? I mean, I still struggle with organizing literature review, even if it has to be like just for a research paper. So it's okay if you are struggling with it. The whole point of this workshop was for you to understand how to streamline your process, right? And again, as I said, this is just a process. You will get better. So, like, maybe you can compare your progress from day or month one when you started out to where you are at the moment, and you will see that some process, like progress, has been made in your process, right? Yeah, I'm now open to questions. And before that, also, Sonali, I'll share some resources. Okay. I have two PDF articles on how to write a literature review, and there was one more that I promised. What was it? Yeah, a literature review chapter, perhaps, as an example. So I'll be sure to like send across these, and maybe you can circulate them amongst the
Sure,
participants.
sure. Thank you so much, Sonakshi, for such a thorough and comprehensive session on literature review. I think that is the part most of us struggle with. And the kind of examples that you shared, and also tabular formats and some writing cues, I think they will be very helpful for us in our tomorrow's writing session, where we'll meet again to sit together and write. But before we conclude the session, the floor is now open for question and answer rounds. Please feel free to raise your hand or also type out your question in the chat box. Okay, we already have two questions. Kajal, please go ahead and ask the question.
Um, Hi. So I wanted to ask, like, how do you keep like your voice intact? Because I feel like once when you read a paper, you kind of you imitate the author's voice, or also like the terms that are used in the paper, then like come into your summary. So I feel like that's where my difficulty lies when like with keeping the voice original, and like still natural or but still academic, like that's the line that's like difficult. So like what has been your experience with this?
I think this anxiety of influence is very real for all of us in the room. So, I think some distance helps in the sense that when I read some author, what I do is I do make points and everything, and I try to like make or write a paragraph, like while making notes and write a paragraph. But what I also end up doing is not put that paragraph on my document, like the official document, right? I try to sit with it and come back to it after like say 3 hours or 4 hours when I have more clarity. I kind of then read that paragraph again or that entire document, thinking that this is just a draft, right? And then where I feel that okay, I'm thinking or I'm writing a lot like the writer that I have just read, I select words or lines which I feel that are too indicative of, I wouldn't call this plagiarism, right? This is more like you got so inspired by the writing process of the writer that you're reading that you're imitating them. And that is a form of flattery, of course, but that can't work for your dissertation or writing. Try to tweak that. That's what I do. I know this is not a very, I mean, again, this is not an absolute solution, but this is something that has worked for me. Getting some distance from the work that I'm writing after reading that particular author, revisiting that piece after letting it sit for some time. This can range from 3 hours to a day as well, whatever works for you. For me, this is now 2 hours. I need 2 hours to let this anxiety of influence get off me, and it helps. And once I come back to the document, that's when I start streamlining that, oh, this is not me, this is not my voice, this is too academic, or this is too slangy, which might fit the tone of the author that you're reading. And then I just tweak it. I use synonyms. Again, not a very good advice because not all synonyms can be used at like appropriately. But then look at what what word or what phrase can you make do with it at that point? And again, that draft moves from your draft zero to draft one. You will get a time to again revise the draft, right? Because there would be another revision. It's maybe at that point when you can finally embrace your voice through edits. Okay, so this is my suggestion, and this is what has really worked for me. There's no other way really for me.
Yeah,
I just
thank
try to
you.
get some distance. Yeah, so I would suggest distance, and distance for anything. Even after you're done writing a chapter, just take some time off, because revisiting the chapter after some time, you will realize that okay, this is not what I meant to say, or perhaps this is a loophole which I thought was absolute airtight while I was initially writing, right? So a distance is what I would suggest for everything whenever you start feeling anxious, but not when you are procrastinating. That will just extend the process.
Yes,
Okay,
Nupur,
I hope
please
this
go
helps.
ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sonakshi, for this session. It was really helpful. So I have two, three questions about literature review that I usually struggle with. So one is your one of the slide was how to organize the main body, in which you said thematic, chronological, contextual perspective. So I wanted to ask you how do we decide uh, which how do we want to organize? I mean, how do we decide? Is it according to our thesis or the research questions that we will take contextual or methodological? So that one. Second question. So I have read a lot of times, and also a lot of people have told me that one has to just scroll through the journal articles, and you don't need to read the entire paper. You can just look at the introduction and the methodology part and the findings part. And I usually struggle with this because when I start reading the paper, I feel like I should study the entire paper and just figure out the process, the way the research has been done or what has come out. So what is the way through this? How should we navigate through that? And the third question, I wanted to ask that how when do we get to know that the literature review is done? So when do we stop the review? So these are, yeah, the questions.
Okay, I think these are really dense questions, and I feel nervous while answering all three of them because I'm just like, okay, these are the trickier questions. So I think I should begin with the first one when you asked what is the right or what should be like, if it should be chronological, thematic, whatever. I mean, this is something that you should ask yourself. There's no sure short way. Like I can't tell you that okay, your research has to be thematical or your research has to be methodological, right? This is something that you have to figure out after examining your own research, your own point of inquiry. If you feel that whatever you're going to position in your research is something that has not been addressed in a particular way, which could be either thematic or which could be methodological, that is how you can decide. Okay, I mean there's no sure short way of going a particular way. You may actually start with one and end up in the other route, right? So this is something that you can have a conversation with with your supervisor, and they could also guide you, right? So this is a call that I feel is largely yours to make. Okay, this is not, I mean, nowhere would you get any document or a manual which would dictate you that, okay, this is how or this is what you pick your point of inquiry in your literature review, right? This will only come to you once you have surveyed the research that has already been done in your field and how it has been done, and what is the novelty that you are going to introduce, and how possibly can you do that. Does it have to be topical, thematic, contextual in terms of geography or method, right? So this is something that is largely your own finding and your own call to make. So this is my answer for your first one. Your second one about journal article. As a reader and as a scholar, I recommend reading all journal articles, right? But if you are short of time, then skim reading is the way to go. But again, skim reading should not just be limited to the introduction and the conclusion. You skim read the entire piece and then you pay particular attention to the introduction and the conclusion. That is good practice. And that is exactly what I had also, like, I think somewhere in my slide also mentioned that this is the way to go about, especially when you have to write summaries and you have a lot of resources to look at. And I think this is also a sense that I get from your question, that you tend, because you are also a reader, you tend to fall into the habit of reading all journal articles, which is good. Okay, but I would say that if you're reading all journal articles and your point of query is coming from this anxiety that I'm wasting time, then accommodate that time so that you don't have to skim read, just skim read, right? So if you know that, okay, there are 20 journals that you have to read related to this particular topic, ensure that I mean, you know your reading speed. So accommodate your time accordingly, or maybe prioritize that, okay, these are mandatory research articles that I have to read, and maybe two or three are research articles which are very secondary. So even if I happen to look at the intro and the conclusion, perhaps that would do. Okay, so maybe start prioritizing also. What is absolutely necessary, read them thoroughly. But things that you feel are secondary or secondary to the secondary, just have a mere glance at them. That might also do. Okay, but again, this is not something that I would absolutely suggest, because this is a matter of building your literature review, and also what if there is a statement or something that actually coincides with your question, your point of inquiry, and you miss it or skip it. So there is a possibility that your research then might just be like discounted as plagiarized or something, right? So you want to make sure that whatever it is that you're putting in is again seal tight, has not been discussed, or if it has been discussed, has not been elaborated. And this is what you're going to do. So credit the person who has maybe like prompted you to think that, and then build on it. And that is why I would recommend to read all documents, definitely. Do reading once, and maybe towards the end, you can just like skim read and then have your notes from the intro and the conclusion. I hope this makes sense. So, prioritizing, making sense of the time that you have, these should be ways of organizing your reading at the moment, because you'll be reading a lot as a scholar. So it won't help you in the long run if you just do the intro and the conclusion. And sometimes there's really nothing in the intro and the conclusion also. Okay, you will just be like, okay, what is this? But the content is really in the main body. So it's a good thing that you feel that you're reading too much, read it, but then accommodate time as well and prioritize. Look at important documents first and then move on to the documents that are slightly secondary. That would be my suggestion. What was your third question? Please, can you repeat it?
Yeah, it is. How do we know that we have to end our the literature review can be ended?
Tricky question again. I think how to end a literature review would just be once you have figured out, okay, for me personally, I just look at the latest work that has been done on the topic. Okay. Again, this is a tip that might work, that might not work, but has worked in my case. And this is my suggestion. Just look at one, you know what you're writing about, right? So you know the specificity. Maybe go through Google Scholar and the other scholarly database that you have, utilize the keywords and see when was that last research done. Okay, and see how latest it is. Use that as your, I mean, and that is also a very good way to position the chronology of research also. You can say that, okay, the last research was done somewhere in, say, like 2024, but after that so much has changed, right? So maybe like organic way of thinking and artificial intelligence, right? And if you're making a case for that, but something on this topic was last written about in 2024, so you would know that, okay, 2024 last published paper, that could be your end. Okay. So you can look at the, how do I put it? You can look at the dates of publication, see which one is more recent, and that recent can be your last. Okay, and from there you can start building your argument. That is where you can end your literature review. But again, another important point to keep in mind is that just ensure that if you're using that particular resource and if you're looking at the year, also look at the content if it is adding to your point of inquiry, right? Because then it would not make sense to put in latest research, but if it is not doing anything to your point of inquiry. So the two things that you have to keep in mind when you to feel that you have finished your literature review is the latest publication and how well it sits with your point of inquiry. These two things. And once you have these two together, tied together, you're good. Your literature review can substantially end, and then you can depart from that and establish your own research question or entry into your uh, writing. Okay.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you.
We have a lot of questions in the chat box. I will only prioritize those questions which have not been already covered. And also I have another request. Please also feel free to put your questions either in Hindi or Marathi. I can translate them for Sonakshi, and then Sonakshi can answer in English, because we also have a lot of participants who had requested earlier to have bilingual sessions. So this next question is from Bhavna. She's asking what we write in my projected findings are section, in the prompt section that you discussed.
This is very simple, Bhavna. In the sense, my projected findings, you don't have to use the exact wording. This is mostly a prompt. Your projected findings is basically to establish what you are going to do. Okay. So you can say something like that in this paper or in this thesis, I depart from, or this thesis departs from this point of inquiry to establish or to understand whatever this is. Okay. So this was just a prompt to get you thinking that this is where you insert your finding or your research, your voice more actively and specifically. Okay. That was basically the function of this prompt. That's it.
Next question is from Payal. So I'll just summarize her question. She's asking how to weave literature review in each section. Uh, Maybe Sonakshi, you can go through the question and answer.
Okay, yeah, I'm just reading this.
Mm-hmm.
But one question, oftentimes it is seen that literature review is often woven in a section. Payal, can you explain this question? I mean, I'm also trying to think where are you getting at? Is this for specifically for a research article that you were talking about? Or, I mean, literature review then can just be, or are you thinking of literature review as evidence when you're making an argument in a body or in a paragraph? I mean, I'm slightly confused about this question.
Okay, so what I meant is that oftentimes it is seen in the specifically as because I am from English literature, in a research article, there is no separate section as literature review, but rather literature review or the existing literature is woven into the argument. It is like, for instance, if I am writing about one topic in one section, the literature review, the existing literature of that section is woven into that section. So that is how the central argument of the entire paper is, the literature review for the central argument of the entire paper is not written in one separate section as literature review, but it is woven into the entire paper section by section. As well as when I'm trying, like you have mentioned that in the first paragraph or at least in the first page you should write your central argument, what you are trying to do in your paper in the introduction itself. So oftentimes it happens that the author is trying to establish his or her own argument on the shoulders of the others argument that goes along the line with his or her argument or point of view. So even in the introduction, they mention briefly about the existing literature regarding that line of argument. So I want to know that how to do that kind of literature review weaving.
Okay, so this is a slightly tricky one because I really haven't I mean, in my writing, as a tutor also, actually come across this kind of literature review per se. So can you give me time to think about this and get back to you if it is possible?
Yes, 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 of course, no problem.
Yeah.
And it is also said that there is a like talk description kind of thing, that narrative, that those who write, like who can weave their literature review into their own argument, those kind of writings seem to be very mature kind of writing, not like the primary basic novice writing where literature reviews would be separately discussed through a different or separate section. So I do not know how much truth is there in this, but I'd like to know that how the weaving is done. Whenever you can, whenever you can take your time, and whenever you can, you can
Okay, so
get
Pal,
back
I'll
to me.
just like intervene. So from what I have understood, you are writing or you are structuring a literature review like topically, right? It is like, okay, within this, and this is a research article that you're talking about. This is not a
Yes,
thesis that you're talking about.
yes, yes, yes.
Okay. A research article and a literature review with topics. I think, okay, let me think more about this because this is the first, yeah, this is perhaps the first time that I'm like encountering this. Because from what I have also like taught and from what has been in like the kind of writing samples that I have seen, they kind of like take literature review first, give an overview, and then begin with the writing. But I get where you are also getting at. It's like topic one, and then you have the entire literature review and the topic that you're going to interview, like talk about woven there, and then move to topic two, and then have the literature review for that, and then topic three, right? This is what
Exactly.
the
Yeah,
sense
yeah.
is.
Hmm.
Okay, okay. Okay, then let me think about this, and maybe Sonali, I can respond to you, and you can like
Sure.
forward it to,
I
yeah?
can pass on the material.
Yeah, okay. I'll just copy this question also. Just 1 minute. Uh, just a second so that I
Next question. Shall we move on to the next question?
yeah, please do. Yeah.
Yashasvi asks, what is the role of AI in writing process, and to what extent do you think it is ethical to use AI?
We will only just say no and no explanation to follow. I know it's very easy to fall into the charm of using AI, but trust me when I say this, and I'm dealing with a lot of students, especially undergraduate students who are using AI. It's bad. It's really bad and it shows, okay? And there's a high possibility that the way the AI is writing, first of all, it will hallucinate sources. It will give you literature review that does not exist. And for that matter, you can do a thought experiment, like I won't even call it a social experiment. You can do it yourself. Just randomly tell your chat GPT or whatever AI tool that you're using to give you sources related to a particular theme and also link those sources and you will see what I'm trying to like tell you. You will land up on random pages. Okay. So my answer, although I said no and no more, but went into explaining this is a definite no. It's not ethical. It's definitely not ethical. Okay. And when you have scholars producing organic scholarship for you to read, do read it. Do not rely on AI. AI summaries are bad. AI sources are bad because in most cases they just don't exist. Perhaps you may be, I mean, feel free to utilize AI if you really want to for proofreading. And that is it. If you really feel the need that, okay, you feel that you don't have a proofreader, you don't have a friend that you can ask for proofreading, but that is also the worst case scenario, honestly, if you really feel the urge to use AI. That is the only productive use that I can positively talk about in terms of AI. To just do a proofreading. That is it, with no interventions of its own. Just a strict proofreading. That is it. So, no research, no summarizing, nothing. That's all that I have to say.
I think we'll move on from this very broad question to a very specific question. We can have another separate session on use of AI in writing. That will be a good topic. Next question, Abir is asking, I'll read out his question. Recently, I'm working on an interdisciplinary project with several people coming from pure sciences background. A lot of the publications they work on are review articles. While this is the first time I'm encountering something like this, I'm wondering how does one go about working on review articles in the humanities and social sciences? Sometimes I'm having trouble with the idea of scale, whether to go wider or narrowly about a topic, and at other times I'm getting lost in the way various researchers are working on the themes in their own papers. Would you suggest a way how I can organize the synthesis in a better manner?
Okay, so this is an interesting question again, and again, I won't say that I have a definite solution for this, right? But as is with most writing, I would say you move from the general to narrow. Okay, and again, when you're dealing with review articles in the humanities and social sciences, I think that's one, I mean, a very good way of actually, working around this is sticking to the theme. That is where I feel most review articles have excelled. Because if you stick close to a theme, you would be referring to authors who have worked on that specific theme only, and what that new scholarship is doing in terms of departing from that theme. And another good way of, because this is review article, and I think I can also, a very good way to actually check this, because I have also written review articles for journals, academic journals. Um, a good ethical way of also keeping in check or streamlining this for your own good is to see if these scholars have been cited in the work, in the scholarship produced. And you will see then how that scholarship is also adding to or departing from the established scholars who have worked on similar themes. So you can actually see, or actually, to organize that synthesis, you can move from the broader aspect. Remember the one thing, that one category where I showed you, social justice, then social justice in education, and then social justice in adult education in India. So you have that broad to that narrow theme. I would suggest that thematically is the best way to go about while moving through review articles and moving from broad to general. Now, of course, the broad to general shouldn't be a departure from the initial broad topic that you have introduced. If it is social justice, stick to social justice, but what about social justice? Where? So you establish the context. So maybe if you're talking about, say, arboreal imaginations, right? Now, a lot of scholars are writing about arboreal imaginations in literature or whatever it is. I mean, for us also, we have Shimona, How I Became a Tree, right? So maybe if someone is reviewing that book as a review, like with for your review article, perhaps you can like see what that theme is about, what that topic is about, and who were the scholars who worked before or who worked on similar themes. Maybe not in India. So that would be the specific, right? So that could be a specific strand that you can look at when you are working with review articles. You can talk about that, okay, this is arboreal imaginations, but there exists a lot of literature and a lot of philosophers who have talked about arboreal imaginations in Europe, in America, but this is one of the first books to be written about while set in India. Okay, so you pick up a particular strand then and then start critiquing or writing about it. And of course, look at the index. I mean, index, I'm saying the glossary or the work cited basically. And you would know that, okay, these are the authors which a review article should have ideally established or mentioned that, okay, these are the scholars who have already worked, but this writing is different, or perhaps this writing is adding more depth to the existing scholarship, whatever way it is structured. So that is also a way of looking at the politics of citation in your literature review, so that you don't leave out people who have been uh, extremely crucial to establishing that line of thought in the first place, right? And in academia, all of this is very common. You might end up not citing people who were actually crucial to that particular scholarship. So you can look at the book that you're reviewing and see the scholars who have been cited to. Just trace that intellectual history. And you will see that this is exactly what I had also mentioned when I showed you that chart of synthesis, where I told you that a synthesis also traces the intellectual history of a thought. So this is basically where your citational politics comes into practice. Okay. So I hope this answers your question, but definitely broad to specific is what I would recommend. Thematic and then context.
We'll move on to next question. I think Abir is following upon his last question. Is there a foolproof way to flag duplicitous articles? Sometimes the journal website seems predatory, but one is not able to make out.
Okay, this is a good catch. I think the best way is to just read it and see where the arguments are not coherent, where there is a lot of like editorial lapses. You know that that is an article which is not um, authentic. Okay. The other way is that there is actually a resource which lists all the predatory journals. I'm forgetting the name of that resource, but I can share it with Sonali once I think it's called something Bell's resource or something of predatory journals. And it is an ongoing list which lists down all the predatory journals and publishing houses and also conferences that you should not be attending. Okay. So these are predatory. But again, I don't think that there is a foolproof way of really figuring out whether an article is inauthentic. I think the only way that you can get to know is that for me personally, I just read the article and I see the strength of the argument or the thesis that they are positioning and how they have gone about proving it. If there are a lot of quotes with nothing coherent, if there are a lot of editorial lapses, and this in itself is an editorial lapse, right? A journal article, a journal editor would work with you to ensure that there are no lapses in your writing. So if you feel and while you're reading, you are certain that there are lots of editorial lapses, you know that this is predatory. Someone has just paid the journal to publish their article and no edits have been done. So this is one very rudimentary way of figuring out a predatory journal or a predatory like publishing house where you don't have an editorial process. And you know that okay, these arguments are not coherent, are not making sense. It's just too much quotations, and I think there was an example on Twitter very recently where an entire article was ChatGPT generated, and this art person ended up also inserting the dialogue where you have towards the end of like when ChatGPT says that, great, would you like me to add something more to it to make it sound theory heavy? And they had just cut, copy, pasted that entire statement as well in the research article. And that research article ended up getting published. This was a predatory journal, right? So everybody who had access to that research journal and was reading that piece could figure out that, oh, this is ChatGPT generated and this is a predatory journal. Because how could you miss out a dialogue that is ChatGPT, right? So maybe look out for that also now. That would also give away that, okay, this was not humanly written, or this was not just, maybe this is just a chatbot also.
Our next question is from Dr. Shinde. The question is in Marathi. I'll read out the question first and then briefly summarize it in English. आपण ज्या विषयावर रिसर्च पेपर लिहित आहोत त्या विषयाच्या अनुरोधाने पूर्व अभ्यासाचा आढावा घेताना यापूर्वीच्या अभ्यासाचे स्वरूप निष्कर्ष हे सारांश रूपाने किती शब्दात लिहावे. उदाहरणार्थ पूर्वीच्या एका पुस्तक किंवा लेखावर किती लिहावे, त्याची भाषा विश्लेषण कसे असावे. So the question is basically about how many words shall we spend on summarizing a particular book or a particular article in our literature review. So I think there are two sub questions. So how many words do we need to spend for summary part of the literature review, and then how many words shall we devote to each specific work or in each specific article?
I think a good practice is just to maintaining the summary anywhere between the range of 200 to 250 words. Uh, for a research article, I can say 150 to 200, and for a book, 200 to 250. But again, this is not absolute, okay? I would suggest that maybe look at the table that I had inserted in my PowerPoint presentation. I think the most crucial information would be that you have all the answers to those questions. And once you have those answers to the questions, then you can streamline the findings and everything and reduce the word count. Of course, this doesn't mean that you end up writing 1000 words, of course, but I think a good range from anywhere between 200 to 300, I think is good enough for a book, for a book. And again, I'm thinking of a book as something which is like 200 words or 250 words, right? So maybe you can think of one page, one word kind of a thing, and then toning it down. Because again, if you are reading a book which is 500 words, like 500 pages long, it's not possible to have a 500 words summary to be integrated in the literature review, is what I'm trying to say. As a standalone, this might work. 500 words for a 500 pages long book. But 500 words to be inserted in a literature review just might not work. So if you're also thinking of inserting that in a literature review, I would say aim for 200 to 250 words. And then once you start editing, then you can further streamline that by integrating it with another book and bringing other thoughts together. Okay, but 200, 250 words for sure. If you go beyond that, then you might risk into thinking that everything is important and you won't feel like editing it down further. But with 200, 250 words, you will work with this knowledge that, okay, if this is non-negotiable as a word count, maybe I need to bring word count down for another piece, right? So this is why, because it's very difficult to kill your darlings and stay with them. So I would suggest that 250 words is what you should aim for, especially when you're trying to integrate that in your literature review.
There's a follow-up question from Dr. Shinde. आपल्या पेपरच्या दृष्टिकोनाच्या अनुषंगानेच या पूर्वीच्या लेखनाची चिकित्सा करावी का? So the question is about, shall we analyze the previous literature only from the perspective that we are writing from for our own writing, like for our own research paper?
Yes, yes, because that is exactly how it would integrate into your research, right? So, also because this is the way that you're going to critique it. Maybe you can highlight what were the plus points of that research and why it is important while acknowledging the positives, the negatives, so that you are able to build on your uh, point of query. But again, this won't be possible for every piece that you read, right? As I showed you in the example, you have to highlight that, okay, while these scholars have worked on this, they have ignored the broader question. Okay. So, you can't be critiquing every. Now, okay, I think I have a better way to answer this question. You can talk or critique every work if you're writing a book review, okay, as a standalone review, I would say, as a standalone review for that particular piece of literature. But when you are integrating that in your literature review, you are following a certain theme or you're following a certain method, right? So you will have to read that paper through that lens and utilize that and integrate that in your literature review. So stick to the particulars is what I would say, instead of like talking about the positives and then highlighting the negatives. So stick to the particulars, highlight that, okay, the work talked about this, sure, and it also brought to attention, say, this particular problem. However, this they didn't consider this, and this is what my research would do. Okay, so be as specific as possible. But if you're critiquing that piece of literature or piece of text as a standalone document, then maybe you can just like, again, you can have a broader perspective, but you'll have to go to the specific, is what I'm trying to say. Okay. And that's the whole point of literature review as well. So this will also allow you to pick sources that will only speak to that particular point of inquiry or line of inquiry or subject of inquiry, to put it better. Okay.
We'll soon wrap up and we'll take the last question for the question and answer round. I think Nupur has raised her hand. Nupur, please go ahead and ask your question.
Yeah. Sonakshi, generally when we do the literature review, then we make our research questions.
Mhm.
So research questions comes after the literature review. But for example, in my case, what has happened is the kind of findings that I have got are very different from the gap that I had recognized in the literature review. Now, in that case, do I go back and do the literature review again and try to find something that is more in sync with my find? I mean, is that ethical, or can I just go with the flow? Because in the process, I did not find that gap, but the findings have come out a bit differently.
Okay. I'm just thinking that can't you, I mean, there is a way that you can also, I mean, one possible way would be like after you talk to your supervisor, perhaps, because your findings have turned out to be different, why don't you tweak your research question instead of, like, do you think changing the research question would significantly affect the literature review?
Not really. But just in case, I don't know if that is allowed to change the research questions, because this is my understanding also, that the findings that I have got have also come out from the research questions, my research inquiry.
Yeah,
So that process is also important. So
exactly. Sorry to intervene. No, no, continue, please.
yeah, so that's what I was trying to think, that if I uh, look at it in a ethical manner, the process, so the entire process has led to this kind of findings. But the in the mechanical way, the formats that are prescribed to us for journal articles or anything, one's findings have to be in sync with the literature review. So should I go ahead, I mean, what way should I take?
This is slightly tricky, and I wouldn't like to offer an absolute answer. Maybe, yeah, this is what I was going to. Yes, that you add something else, like add an addendum to the initial question that you had sought to position, and also like this can just be established later as well. And of course, talk to your supervisor about this, how to address this. Do they recommend doing the literature review again? Because I don't think that I mean, my way, what I would possibly do is that add an addendum to the research question that I had initially started with, because that has been the whole process, right? And tweaking everything now, I would feel slightly n- non-ethical about this, if I can put it in a way. I mean, I would just think that I'm tweaking my research to suit my findings. Are you understanding
Yeah,
what I'm
that's, I
trying to
mean,
say?
that was also my concern
Yeah,
also in that same, yeah.
exactly. So, like, why am I tweaking it because this is not what I initially started with? So, maybe add an addendum, but definitely have a word with your supervisor. They would be in a better position to help you and supervise you uh, with this. Or there's a total possibility that I mean, there's always a possibility that your findings do not always match with the question that you started with. So there are ways to also like kind of address that by saying that, okay, one important thing that came out was, or one shortcoming of my own formulation was that I forgot to take into consideration this. which drastically affected my findings or whatever. Okay. And then that could be a follow up to your research question as well. So you can tweak your research question and elaborate it as well.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah, yeah.
Right? Yeah. So I would say that do definitely talk to your supervisor, because then tweaking your literature review or your research question would be something unethical, because then you're trying to change the course of research with what you had initially started out, right, to suit your findings. So maybe adding an addendum or also highlighting your own fallacy or shortcomings to further corroborate that this could have improved, or this was something that you didn't consider, could just be a way of like bridging that gap which has come up now. So again, I would say that your supervisor would be in a better position to offer a final solution.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah.
Um, Thank you so much, Sonakshi, again for such an insightful and helpful session. I think we all at some point of time struggle with literature review and these questions. And I think your session also allowed all of us and our participants as well to share our own queries and questions that we think that only we struggle with. Also, thanks to all the participants for being here and also contributing with your very pointed questions.